According to metacognitive therapy, you have much more control over what makes you depressed. So let's dive into that. A lot of my clients, prior to coming to metacognitive therapy, have been told that when they suffer from depression, their depression just comes out of nowhere. A depressive episode is something that they cannot control, makes them feel bad, makes them feel demotivated, sad, and hopeless. And they kind of have to survive that period in order to move on with life. Question is if this is really true. If depressive episodes just come out of nowhere and there's nothing you can do. According to metacognitive therapy, people who suffer from depression do one thing continuously that does make them feel depressed, and that makes it harder for them to get out of a depressive episode. And that thing is rumination. Rumination is a form of overthinking. Normally, when I say overthinking, you might think, well, I'm thinking over an episode that happened at work or in my relationship, and I just go over and over that. Rumination is a similar process where a thought pops up out of nowhere. For example, no one likes me. And you start dwelling on that thought and building on that thought in an effort to try to understand the meaning of things. So if someone ruminated about the thought, no one likes me, it could go like this. No one likes me. I am no good anyway. I never get invitations to parties and I don't have anyone to hang out with. I'm lonely. I'm gonna stay this way. Why would people even like me? There's nothing about me that's interesting. People with depression ruminate about a lot of different things. Usually it starts with some sort of self-critical thought or some sort of hopelessness about the future perhaps, or something that happened in the past. For example, I always make mistakes, or why do I have this type of family, or what is wrong with me? However, after ruminating for some time, what happens is that they do get more depressed. This rumination makes them feel down and sad and hopeless. And when these feelings of depression, when these symptoms take over, this triggers even more rumination. So people will start ruminating about how they feel. Why am I not happy? What is wrong with me? There must be something abnormally wrong with me since I feel this way. Other people are able to move on with life and get it together. When people ruminate about their mood and the fact that they are depressed, usually they do that in an attempt to understand why this is the case. And they try through their rumination to find solutions to their depression so that they can problem solve this and move on and feel better. However, ruminating for some time and for too long only makes matters worse. You've probably tried this before. If you ruminated about something 2 hours down the road, you probably didn't feel better about yourself or about your situation or the problem you were thinking about. Instead, you probably felt sad and even hopeless and probably concluded that things are much more terrible than when you initially thought to begin with. Dwelling on a negative thought, which is what rumination is, does of course impact the mood in a negative way. Thinking about you not being good enough is not going to make you feel happier a couple of hours later. In fact, it's going to make you even sadder or more insecure and less confident about yourself. Dwelling on negative thoughts for a long period of time does impact our moods and make us feel worse. So that's one thing about rumination that's not helpful. The other thing is that rumination impacts the way the brain thinks. So our brains usually only think in terms of what is useful for us. And it doesn't really distinguish between the type of thought that we're thinking. So your brain doesn't really care whether you're thinking about chocolate cake or you're thinking about I'm a terrible person. The only thing it notices is that how much time do you spend thinking about each individual thought. So if you think about I'm a terrible person, your brain then thinks that these kind of thoughts are important for you. So it's going to help you by feeding you with more thoughts. So if you dwell on a specific thought, even though it's a terrible and negative thought, your brain doesn't care. It only believes that this is an important thought for you, so it's going to feed you with more thoughts. So what happens is that rumination makes you have more of the same type of thoughts and less of the good and positive or neutral thoughts. So in a way, you can tell that rumination alters your brain and the way it thinks, going from having perspective on a specific problem to getting completely caught up in rumination and feeling sad and hopeless and less self-confident to even having more negative thoughts about yourself or your situation. So rumination is like scratching a wound. You've cut yourself with a knife by accident. That wound is going to heal on its own because your body is able to take care of that. So this is an automatic self-regulatory process. All you need to do is probably just clean it and leave it alone. You don't go in and scratch the wound all the time or monitor it to see if it's healed or not. Because the more time you spend scratching the wound or doing something, the longer the healing process will be. And having negative thoughts and negative emotions or having gone through bad experiences in life is similar to having gotten a wound. So you have a psychological wound and it's painful. Just like a flesh wound would feel painful. But just like you wouldn't scratch the flesh wound in order to make it heal faster, you don't need to scratch your mental wound in order to feel better and recover from that distressing experience or move on from these negative thoughts and emotions. However, when we ruminate, when we spend a lot of time dwelling on our thoughts, our moods, and why we feel the way we do, when we dwell on feeling depressed and why that is, it's similar to scratching the psychological wound. We prevent the mind from taking care of these thoughts and feelings on its own, because the mind is able to help us recover from depression on its own. This is an amazing ability that is capable of. However, scratching the wound, ruminating a lot about how we feel and why we feel the way we do and how we can feel better is actually making matters worse. And that takes the brain longer time to self-regulate and help us heal. So the more you try to find out why you feel the way you do, why you're feeling depressed, what you can do to recover, the worse you're going to feel because you're prolonging that process instead of healing and getting better. So according to metacognitive therapy, rumination is the core feature. It is the process that we actively engage in that makes us feel depressed. So the solution to overcoming depression is to stop doing that. And we're going to get to that in a bit. But let's first look at what it is that people with depression also do that could contribute to them feeling worse and prolonging their recovery. So people with depression do several things that also hinder them from healing and overcoming depression, aside from ruminating. So one thing many people with depression do is to avoid activities and social situations. The worse they feel, the more they think they need to rest and recover before they can resume these activities. A lot of my clients tell me that they have avoided doing all the activities that they usually enjoyed. For example, their hobbies or going out and doing stuff that they like. And they also stop seeing friends and family so much because they think they need to recover and feel better before they can go out and face these things. However, doing less of the things that you enjoy and that is part of your meaningful life is going to give you more time to ruminate. And the more you ruminate, the worse you're going to feel, the more you're going to put off doing these things, and it becomes a negative cycle that you cannot really get out of. Another strategy that people with depression usually do is to try to cope by either taking substances or numbing themselves with alcohol or food. Now, some people do lose their appetite and don't want to eat much, while others use food or alcohol to numb their thoughts and numb their emotions. However, this also leads to more triggering thoughts and negative thoughts maybe later on or the next day, because usually these coping strategies are not in line with their values. So if someone is upset and ruminates about the way they look and the fact that they're not in shape or they would like to be in shape, but they also dull these feelings and thoughts with more food, they're going to experience more negative thoughts about how they look and how bad they are at keeping up with healthy routines. Similar to people who avoid doing activities or going out and spending time with friends and family, they're going to have more negative thoughts about them being lonely, or that maybe no one likes them, no one is reaching out to them, or they're a bad friend, bad family member. So many of these activities, although they are done in an effort to feel better in the short term, only lead to more negative thoughts and can trigger rumination in the long term. Luckily, there are good news, because rumination is an active strategy that we actively do. So it's a thinking strategy that we actively do and engage in order to solve problems or understand the meaning of things. So rumination is basically having a conversation with yourself, just going back and forth in your mind and answering all kinds of questions of why did this happen? Why am I feeling this way? What might this lead to? Luckily, this can also be stopped. So in order to recover, we need to reduce the amount of time we spend ruminating. Reducing rumination is similar to not scratching the wound that you've gotten. It is tempting to keep scratching the wound, especially if it gets itchy, but it's just something you have control over. You can decide not to scratch. So it's a similar process in the brain. When you have negative thoughts about you not being good enough, that you will never recover, that you'll never feel better, that there's something wrong with you, you can decide to leave these thoughts be instead of going in and ruminating about them and have this conversation back and forth. So basically, the goal is for you to let this psychological wound heal on its own. And the best and fastest way to do that is by reducing the amount of time you ruminate about your thoughts, you ruminate about your problems and your mood. This is the reason why metacognitive therapy is so effective, because it recognizes that rumination is the core process that starts and maintains depressive episodes. Treatment goes directly to reduce the amount of time people ruminate and help people understand that they have full control over their rumination. So let's see what that would look like if you were to try this on your own. However, a word of caution: if you're struggling with moderate to severe depression, I highly recommend that you seek your doctor and go and find a certified metacognitive therapist that can help you go through these steps and recover from your depression. This video is helpful tips and advice, but it's not going to substitute actual therapy. So do bear that in mind. However, if you do have a tendency to overthink and you are ruminating, you can try these things and see what that would feel like compared to trying to find solutions to your depression by overthinking all the time. So the best way to reduce rumination is actually by labeling it when it happens and postpone doing that for later. I usually tell my clients to schedule a 15-minute rumination time later in the day. So half an hour, 5 p.m. or 7 p.m., that is your rumination and reflection time. That is the time you spend trying to figure out why you feel that way, why someone said what they said, and why things are the way they are. So that is your time to go crazy with rumination and give it all you have. However, the rest of the time, try to take a break from that and allow your mind to deal with these emotions on its own. So what you can do is basically just notice that you're ruminating and tell yourself, oh, I am ruminating right now. I'm not going to do that now. I'm going to do that later in my rumination time. And once you've done that, just refocus on the things that you are doing. So if you are making breakfast, just focus back on making breakfast and let the chatter just continue in the back of your mind without actively engaging in it. Or if you're talking to someone, just refocus on that conversation instead of going on and analyzing why you feel the way you do and all your thoughts that come up. Postponing is going to help your mind filter out 80% of all the stuff, so that later in the day you are going to feel a bit lighter, a bit better. However, this is not a miracle cure, so just because you postpone ruminating for 5 minutes, it's impossible to expect that you should feel better right away. So this is a process. Just like healing a wound is going to take some days and maybe weeks, it's a similar process in the brain. It's going to take some time for your mind to completely heal itself from the depression. But you have to stay consistent and keep postponing rumination and reduce that to only half an hour every day. So this is one very important tip, and it's going to work if you do it consistently. Now, some of my clients do tell me that they are not always aware that they are ruminating. They just notice that they feel bad or they feel empty or they feel sad, but they don't necessarily ruminate, at least they don't think. But usually they do some sort of activity, but because they've done that for so long, it no longer feels like this is something they're actively doing. So they're barely noticing that they are ruminating. So if you're one of those who barely notices that something's going on, but you just notice you're feeling sad and depressed, you are still probably doing something actively in the back of your mind. So the best way to discover that is basically just ask yourself from time to time, I wonder what I am doing right now in my mind. Am I reflecting on things? Am I worrying about the future? Am I ruminating about how I feel? Am I trying to find solutions to my depression? And just noticing that and labeling that is going to help you identify it more so that you can postpone doing that activity for later. Another way is just to notice whenever you feel particularly down or particularly sad or demotivated or depressed, that's probably an indicator that you've been doing something for the past probably minutes or hours. That's a good time for you to check in and ask yourself, what am I doing right now? What kind of thoughts am I mulling over? And label that as rumination and postpone that for later. So aside from postponing and limiting the amount of time you spend ruminating, another good strategy is to create a boring plan and follow that consistently. So what I mean by a boring plan is basically just schedule out a rough plan of what your day is going to look like. And this is especially applicable for those who don't have much to do on the weekends and instead they have too much time to spend ruminating, or those who spend a lot of time at home without doing activities. Usually that gives them more time to spend ruminating. So we want you to get out of that and get out of your head some more. And by following a boring plan consistently is going to help you achieve that alongside with postponing rumination. So schedule a rough plan of how your day is going to look like. So cooking breakfast, walking the dog, searching for jobs, or studying for a couple of hours, go grocery shopping, go for a walk, go to the gym, whatever it is, just make a boring, simple plan and make sure to follow that even when you feel the least like it, because you are going to feel very little motivation for doing some of these things, especially on days when you're feeling particularly bad. So make it a habit to continue to postpone ruminating and still follow your boring plan regardless of how you feel and how depressed you are. The third thing you can do is to stop monitoring how you feel and stop monitoring for your progress. Now, a lot of people who feel depressed have a tendency to monitor their mood and checking on their energy levels very often. Am I able to get on with my day and face all the challenges? Do I have enough energy or do I need to rest more? Am I recovering or am I feeling worse? However, this constant monitoring also leads to a lot of rumination. So similar to scratching the wound and constantly observing it is not going to help it heal faster, and in some instances slows down the healing process. So monitoring and checking in very often how you feel leads to more rumination and doesn't help you recover. So you have to be okay with feeling bad for some time in order to recover. And the best thing you can do is basically just refocus back on your boring plan whenever you notice that you are checking in and monitoring how you feel. So here were 3 tips inspired by metacognitive therapy that can help you take control back over depressive episodes and hopefully in the future prevent one from happening. So first and most important tip is to reduce the amount of time you spend ruminating, because rumination makes you depressed. So postpone ruminating for your half an hour later in the day and take a break from all this thinking throughout the day. Second tip, your boring plan is going to help you stay more focused on the external things rather than being in your head and ruminating all the time, and at the same time be more productive, which can lead to feeling good about yourself and give you more confidence and motivation back in the long run. And the third tip is to stop checking in and monitoring your progress and how you feel and whether you are more or less tired today. The more you do that, the more you're slowing down your progress. So it's important to reduce doing that and just refocus on following your boring plan and let your mind take care of the depression on its own. Thank you so much for watching.